Welcome to the Non-Woke Coach podcast, the show that celebrates success without the woke. Each episode features successful people who have embraced their true nature as free, independent, exceptional beings with the capacity for well-being, rather than accepting the victimhood mindset of the woke agenda. I'm your host, Ellen McCarthy, and I'm glad you've tuned into this episode. Welcome to the first episode of the Non-Woke Coach podcast. I'm thrilled and inspired to be joined by my first guest, an exceptionally talented comedy club and festival headliner who doesn't hide his conservative political views. He's a comedian and an Emmy Award-winning writer whose work and accomplishments include writing for and starring in segments on Ellen, where he worked for 10 years, appearances on Conan FOX Laughs and Gutfeld, freelance contributions to SNL's Weekend Update, writing for the Oscars, sketches featured by the Babylon Bee, winning the comedy competition at Politicon, and delivering the commencement address at Penn State, his alma mater. And if that wasn't enough, he hosts a satirical YouTube show, The Canceled News, and you can watch his stand-up special, Adam Yenser, Not Big Enough to Cancel, on drybarcomedy.com. Adam, thank you for being here.
Thank you for that intro. It was my entire biography.
I don't know.
It's great to be here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You're known for mixing sharp observational humor with a uniquely conservative perspective. How did you get your start?
So as far as stand-up goes, I started when I was living in New York. My sort of what got my foot in the door of the comedy industry is while I was at Penn State, I got an internship for Conan O'Brien's show when he had Late Night, which taped out of Rockefeller Center in New York. And so I always had an interest in comedy, wanted to get into comedy writing, got that internship, and kind of had in the back of my mind that I wanted to do stand-up, and I wrote down jokes in a notebook for probably 3 years before I got the nerve to actually get on stage and do it. And there was a open mic at the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater in New York City about 15 years ago now. And the host of the open mic at the time was Pete Holmes, who's gone on to do a lot of great stuff in comedy. But that's where I got my start as a stand-up comedian. And then, working at Conan, I was exposed to some of the most brilliant comedy writers out there. Learned so much from working at that show. And then when that show moved to Los Angeles, I started applying to writing jobs and got the job at the Ellen Degeneres Show. So that was my first staff writing job.
No, that's great. I didn't realize you were from New York. I'm from New York, born and raised.
Oh, really? I'm from
Yeah.
Pennsylvania originally, so I grew up in the Allentown area, and then
Okay.
I lived in Brooklyn for a little over 3 years while I worked for Conan.
What part?
Brooklyn Heights.
I grew up there.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, I like LA. I like most of the places I've lived, but I do miss Brooklyn.
Now I miss the Heights too, but that's a coincidence.
Yeah.
So, was it a conscious decision on your part to incorporate your political views in your work?
I think it was conscious insofar as when I grew up, I loved SNL, I loved Weekend Update, I loved The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. I saw commenting on politics as being part of comedy. It's something that stand-up comedians did. It's something that all the satirical shows that I watched did. And so it was conscious in that I worked that into my comedy. I don't think I consciously wanted to become known for doing political comedy, which I don't know if I have been because I mix political and non-political material. But in a time when politics has become so polarized, and for a long time there were not a lot of conservative leading comedians, it became a more noteworthy part of what I was doing. But I never set out to be a conservative comedian, quote unquote. I saw myself more, and I still see myself more as a comedian who happens to be conservative, rather than someone who's coming from a place of political punditry or media on the right that's just trying to push a political perspective. But it was weird because being influenced by somebody like Jon Stewart, or even I used to love Stephen Colbert when he had the Colbert Report. I'm not as big a fan of his current show, but I think it was hilarious. And I started comedy right around the time, Obama had been president for a few years. And I was doing jokes, my views were more conservative leaning, so I would do sort of anti-Obama jokes. But to me, it didn't feel like something that was, I don't know, exceptional or out of the ordinary. It took a little bit before I realized, oh, there's very few other people that are going after that side, and it's sort of weird because I was influenced by a lot of the people who are more on the Democratic side just through their political comedy.
Well, how have you mentioned a little while ago that before and now, so have things changed over the years in that respect, in terms of being able to talk about, joke about politics?
Yeah, I think things have definitely changed a lot. I think there's always been some polarization in comedy, but you had people that used to kind of go after both sides, or when you used to watch. I grew up loving Johnny Carson and David Letterman and Conan O'Brien, and you could watch those guys, and maybe every now and then they'd make some political reference that showed their hand, but for the most part, you didn't really know whether they were Democrats or Republicans, or which side they sided with on every single issue. And I think what's sort of ironic about what's happened since then through things like cancel culture and political correctness is, if you look at the sort of mid to late 90s, there was a time when it was conservatives, and especially sort of the Christian right, that the media worried about offending. There's a famous story of a comedian, Bill Hicks, who taped a segment for David Letterman, and he's a brilliant comedian, but he was on the pro-choice side, and so he had these abortion jokes in his set. And at the time, the Letterman show refused to air it. Now, years later, Letterman brought Bill Hicks's mom on because Bill Hicks passed, and they aired the set. And it's, obviously, I don't agree with everything he says politically, but he's a brilliant comedian, and they never should have censored that point of view, regardless of who disagrees with it. Now, in the modern era, as the culture has become so left leaning, especially in the media and academia, they're now the puritanical side that you can't offend. They're the ones that everyone is afraid to, criticize. And now I will say, over the last year to 2 years, I see more and more pushback against that through people like Dave Chappelle and things like that that aren't afraid to go after some of these sacred cows. But it has had this chilling effect, and I think part of that was the sort of active effort to silence opposing points of view. And then there's also, what I found working in Hollywood is, there's people on the left that are producers and agents and run studios, that even if they're more on the left, they themselves don't necessarily want to censor these points of view, but they're afraid of the people further to the left. They know what's going to happen to them if they dare give a platform to someone who's pro Trump or doesn't agree with the transgender nonsense or is pro life. They know that there'll be a backlash from people even further to the left than them. Um, and the other thing I think that's interesting is, I always think it's interesting to point this out. I was very much influenced by Jon Stewart and The Daily Show. My generation grew up
Right.
watching that. And I think a lot of comedians, because they were influenced by Jon Stewart's sense of humor and that style, who's somebody I still look up to, they got it in their heads that to do comedy, you kind of have to be on the left. That comedy is like a left wing art form. And I think a lot of the people who tried to follow in the footsteps of Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert just kind of organically developed that perspective because that's all they were hearing.
So, what do you think are the main factors of your success in that type of environment? And
Um, there's a few factors. First of all, I've never hidden it. I think part of the, I understand there's people that worry about getting canceled and worry about, the backlash they'll feel. But the thing is, the people that are pushing this sort of censorship the hardest, that's what they want. They want you to be afraid to say your point of view. So I've never, at the time I worked for Conan, the people I worked with knew I was conservative, even though there wasn't a lot of other conservatives there. When I worked for Ellen, the people there knew I was conservative, even though there wasn't a lot of other conservatives there. I don't think conservative people working in entertainment do, our side much service by keeping it quiet and hiding it. And I also do think, as much as cancel culture is a real thing, I think their fears are overblown sometimes. The other thing that I would say is, I've always tried to have constructive conversations with people on the other side. I never hide my point of view, and I don't mind being, disagreeing with them very openly and very passionately on some issues. But I've never been what they call on the internet like a troll or an edgelord, where I'm trying to say
Right.
the most provocative, offensive thing, where I'm trying to sort of get under their skin in some sort of antagonistic way. And I think a lot of people in conservative comedy, even today, there's a lot of people that come at it from a political background or a pundit background and then try to be funny. And they're very heavy handed, and it's not something that's ever going to win any hearts or minds on the other side. It'll rally the base, but you're not
Mhm.
going to win a lot of fans on the other side. And kind of what I said earlier, but I see myself as a comedian who happens to be conservative. I've always tried to put being funny first. And when I kind of saw that they were trying to push conservatives out of the entertainment industry, instead of fleeing to conservative media or trying to build a right wing audience, my mindset was, okay, I'm going to try to be so funny and get as good at this as I can, that they won't be able to exclude me, or that they'll see the value in what I'm contributing to these shows. And part of the way I've done that is when I do stand up, I like going out to clubs in liberal cities. I like going out to the clubs in New York. I like going out to the clubs in LA. I like when there's both Democrats and Republicans and independents. I don't mind performing for people that are all on the other side of the political spectrum, because I feel like if you write a joke that's good enough, you'll get people to laugh even if they disagree. So that's kind of always been my strategy.
And I think it shows. You get that across, and you're successful at being funny, even if they disagree
Sometimes we all
with
fail
what you're
sometimes
saying.
too. Hopefully.
You know, it's funny. In the I was in corporate America for many, many years, and it was you used to be able to go and have a discussion about your with your liberal colleagues. I mean, you could discuss your differences, right? And then
Yeah.
you could go and have lunch or a drink, and everything was fine. But
Yep.
today, it's like I stopped. I really applaud you for using your authentic voice and not being afraid to do it. I just became quiet and just
Yeah.
let people think that just because I'm this educated woman from New York that I'm a liberal and I voted for Hillary. Okay.
Uh,
And I finally woke up when it was in the middle of Trump derangement syndrome, and I just started a job, and this woman says to me, "Well, aren't you glad you voted for me?" And I'm like, "Well, no, I didn't."
yeah.
And she was so traumatized by the fact that I didn't. And it's like, that's when I said, I've had enough. I can't just be silent anymore. So I think it's great that you are doing what you're doing. And
Thank you. And I've experienced that too. What's interesting when you live in the coastal cities or a liberal area, just in social interactions in the workplace, people enter into the conversation assuming everyone's on the same side. They just assume, oh, we're all liberal people here. Yeah, I hate even using. I should say leftist. I hate
yeah,
using the word liberal, because liberalism in itself isn't a bad
correct.
idea. It's just, we've all become accustomed to using that term to refer to the left. But yeah, they kind of go into it assuming, we're all on the left on all these issues, and a lot of people aren't. And I experienced that at Ellen, especially. There were a handful of other people on staff that, if I would say something, they'd come up afterwards and be like, I agree with you, but don't say anything. It's just like it's just like, don't tell anyone, but I'm on your side.
Nah, that's crazy. Y-
Yeah.
You know, you joke around that you're not big enough to cancel, but have as a conservative leaning comedian, have you been
Uh-huh.
impacted by cancel culture?
So I would say that I have, but I want to be specific in the ways, because I do think cancel culture has taken a real toll on certain people. I think when you look at someone like Shane Gillis, who was hired at SNL as a writer and then was almost immediately fired before he ever got a chance because of some old podcast joke that he had made years before. I think you can call that out as being a clear example of cancel culture. The same with Gina Carano on The Mandalorian, where it's, she made this post and then she's fired from a successful show. I myself, I don't love. I like complaining about the impact of cancel culture on the broader culture. I think there are some comedians, especially up and coming comedians on the right, who sort of exploit it and say, "Oh, people aren't following me because I'm being canceled." And it's like, are you really being canceled, or is your stuff not good enough and it's not gaining a following? And now you're using the claim, hey, hashtag follow me to fight cancel culture as a gimmick to build your audience. So I don't complain about the impact it's had on me a whole lot, because I do feel like I've had a successful career in Hollywood. And whether I might be wrong about this, but even working at the Babylon Bee now, I do feel like I could go back and get a job on a mainstream show again. I feel like if I put a writing sample together, that's still in the cards. Where I would say I've felt the impact of cancel culture is that, in addition to canceling people's careers, it also denies people opportunities on the right. And there's times where, for instance, doing spots on late night shows. Now, I did a stand-up spot on Conan in 2013. Shortly after that, a few years later, I had another set that, as it's my own take on it, but working in that industry, it was definitely a TV ready set, but it had some conservative jokes in it. I could not get that on the air anywhere. I know one booker at a well-known late night show was in talks with me to have me on the show to do the set, and there was an abortion joke in there, and he said, "No, I don't want to do this joke because I don't want to conjure images of abortion for our audience." And I said, okay. And then a week later, there was a comedian on that show doing abortion jokes, but they were from the pro-choice perspective. It was never that they don't want to have abortion jokes on their show. They'll have Chelsea Handler on talking about her abortions. They'll have, SNL cast members talking about their abortion. It's that you can't come on and do that from a pro-life perspective. And, there's another instance I had where there was a booker from one of the other main late night shows who saw me at a comedy club. He said, "I loved your set. Here's my card. Email me some stuff." I emailed him a set that was very similar to what he had seen, but it had a couple of conservative jokes in it, and never heard any response from him again. So there's this thing where anyone who's on the left is allowed to say, in as heavy-handed a way as they want, whatever they want to on these mainstream comedy shows. I mean, you look at just what happened with Hassan Minaj a few weeks ago. Are you familiar with this? So, like,
Why don't you
like
just
yeah, so
remind me?
Hassan Minaj, who I actually knew a little bit coming up in the comedy scene, and I thought he was a decent comic. He was a nice guy when I knew him. We haven't stayed in touch well, but he became a Daily Show correspondent. He hosted the White House press corps dinner, and then it just came out that a lot of these stories he was telling in his stand-up, as if they were autobiographical experiences about him getting attacked for being Muslim, about the FBI infiltrating his mosque and police throwing him up against a car, and people sending anthrax to his family, and he had to take his daughter to the hospital over it. It was all BS. It was all made up. It's like Jussie Smollett style stories, where it's just, this theater to show how oppressed and victimized you are. But people like that who do this heavy-handed political stuff on the left, they can go on all these shows and be as heavy-handed as they want, hating Trump, hating Republicans, being as blatant with their message as possible. And then these shows will be like, well, they'll maybe say, "Oh, well, we don't mind having people on both sides on," but you cannot be a conservative person as openly in the mainstream comedy industry as you can if you're on the left. So that's where I would say I felt the impact of cancel culture, as much as I have a great resume that you kind of touched on my intro, and I've had a lot of great opportunities. There's other comedians at my level who have been, offered shows or offered more late night spots, and those are the sorts of things that you get denied if you're on the right.
How do you overcome that?
For me, it's like I said, my mindset is always, I just have to keep writing more and getting funnier. Like, I have to keep, like, you have to just make it undeniably funny. And you can look for other outlets. I mean, I've had a great experience working with the Bee. I've had a great experience with making my dry bar special. But I think what's hard is the left still controls the mainstream comedy industry. So it's like, when I do stuff funny that's just funny and apolitical, I can get it in that world. And then a lot of right-wing media, they'll say they want to do stuff in comedy, and they'll say, "Why is there no conservative SNL? Why is there no conservative Daily Show?" But some of them either don't have the resources to produce a show like that, or, to be frank, the people in charge of right-wing media, they're not comedy people. They want to do something funny, and they try to do something that's funny, but they come from either a business background, a right-wing social media background, or a political pundit background, and they're not developing comedic talent and recognizing what's good comedically in the way that, say, like a Lorne Michaels did at SNL, where you're drawing the best comedic talent and develop. But it's like I still see, um, this sort of mainstream comedy industry where if I just keep writing and working hard and doing the best stand up I can, I think opportunities will come. Maybe I'm naive in that, but that's my strategy.
No, I don't think you are.
Yeah,
Maybe I have
exactly,
it wrong, but it seems like you just want to
exactly.
tell jokes that are funny. Yeah, you have a viewpoint, but and I think that's why do you have to get, yes, you're a
Yeah.
conservative, but why do you have to get so caught up in that message? Just have fun with your audience. Do I have that right?
And what I've always, yeah, absolutely. And what I've always said, I told this to a lot of comedians. I probably said it on podcasts before, but for everyone from like Stephen Colbert on the left to Steven Crowder on the right, if your political jokes only make people laugh who already agree with you, they're not good jokes. Like if it's clapter, it's pandering, it's uh, you know, it's just not. It's like laziness. It's lazy writing. It's lazy comedy. If you're only growing an audience among people that are on your side, if you're only making jokes that make people on your side laugh, it's like try harder, do better comedy.
No, that's great. Now you're doing the Roast of Brandon Strock at WakaCon on
Yes, yeah,
November. You're appearing on the 11th, but WakaCon, and for anyone who doesn't know, Walkaway is having their fifth anniversary of the movement that really encourages folks who are on the left and have gotten sick of the radicalism of the Democrat Party to walk away from it. So you'll be appearing
yeah.
there. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. So I was introduced to Brandon Strock, the founder of the Walkaway movement, at I think it was there's various different secret Hollywood Republican meetings. That's what I call them. Like there was a famous one years ago, Friends of Abe, and then that one kind of disbanded, and it's reappeared in different forms, and I never remember what they're all called. I always say I met him at one of my secret Hollywood Republican meetings, where he was speaking, and then I also did a stand-up show at another secret Hollywood Republican group where he was speaking. But yeah, he's a really nice guy. He's come out to my shows a few times. I'm a fan of his, and he founded this walk away movement as a way for people, whether they're that are former Democrats that want to leave the Democratic Party because of what it's become or because they've been misled about what it stands for. And he has a very interesting, I won't rehash his story, but he has a very interesting story about during the Trump years about how he came to this realization coming from the left. And, he's reached out to anyone on the Democratic Party, but especially these groups that the left tries to pander to, like, whether you're a gay person or a black person or some minority group, that the left kind of sends you this message: in order to support this group, you have to be a Democrat, which isn't true at all. And I admire what he's done, and I also just roasts are very fun. So he's having this anniversary party to celebrate all weekend the anniversary of the Walk Away movement, and to have some fun. Myself and some other right-leaning comedians and media figures are going to have a roast of him. So I think it'll be fun
No,
for
it
everybody.
sounds great. I've been a supporter for quite some time. And actually, I'm a bronze sponsor of the event. And what we're trying to do, if you don't mind my a plug of a social media giveaway,
No, plug
I'm
whatever you
giving
want. Yeah, it's your podcast.
I'm giving away two tickets to two weekend VIP tickets to WakaCon. So all anybody has to do is follow Non-Woke Coach and Real Walkaway on Twitter, X, whatever it is now, and they'll be entered, and you'll get to
Yeah,
go. It's I think the two tickets together are $1,000 value, and you'll get to go and see you at WalkaCon and the roast of
yeah,
Brandon Strock. So,
yeah.
so
It was also a fun opportunity for me because it's been a long time since I've done a roast. It's not really my style, but I've done a roast for some comedian friends a few years ago, and it's always fun to write that sort of where you're honoring the person, but you're also taking some fun digs at them as well. So it's a fun, right, comedic
Now
way.
that goes back to just what we said before. Just really just have fun with it and don't get offended and all that other
Yeah,
crazy stuff.
yeah,
So now I'll give you a couple of plugs. Next one is October 22nd at Etowanda Roadhouse in Rancho Cucamonga, California at 6 o'clock. Then in November, as we said, the Roast of Brandon Strack in West Palm Beach, Florida. And December 15th and 16th at 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. at Crackpots at Massillon, Ohio. Is that right?
yes, yeah. You did well with that name. You did better than the first time I tried to pronounce it. But and also I just have one added. November 1st to 4th, I'm going to be at the Comedy Cabana in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. So if there's any fans listening, come and check out those shows.
Yes, please go see Adam. And also be sure to catch Adam's next episode of the Canceled News on YouTube and keep up with all of his upcoming shows on his website, adamyenser.com. Adam, it has been a real pleasure speaking with you, and thank you for making the time, especially when you have just a couple of hours before the show. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, Adam. That's it for this episode of the Non-Woke Coach podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Please follow the show on your favorite podcast listening platform so you don't miss the next episode. While you're at it, please sign up to our email list at linktree/non-woke-coach, where you can also download free success resources and learn more about my private coaching packages. I'm Ellen McCarthy, the Non-Woke Coach, and until next time, keep embracing your true successful nature.